Imagine you're standing in this incredibly elite, heavily guarded art gallery.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. So the floors are polished concrete, the lighting is just meticulously angled, and there, mounted on the main wall, is a canvas painted entirely white.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
There's literally nothing else on it, just a flat, featureless coat of white paint. And the person standing next to you whispers that this piece just sold to a private collector for $50 million.
That's wild.
Exactly. And inside, your brain is just screaming, like, my toddler could do that. It's just house paint.
Right.
But somehow, the international art world has declared it a transcendent masterpiece.
It's just the ultimate cognitive dissonance, honestly.
It really is.
You're staring at this seemingly empty object, trying to find, the $50 million worth of value, and you're just coming up completely empty.
So today, we're going to figure out why your reliable ruler for measuring reality just completely broke.
I love that framing.
Welcome back to this audio overview, which is the 7th installment of our larger multi-part series on philosophy.
We're making our way through.
Slowly but surely. We are currently in part 4, and this entire section of the series is dedicated to epistemology.
Which, for anyone just joining us, is simply the study of how we know what we know.
Exactly. And we are holding off on diving into specific historical eras or deep diving individual thinkers until later in the series. Right now, this deep dive is all about establishing the core tools and the baseline rules of reality.
Because if you don't have the tools to measure reality, you can't build any philosophical houses. You really need a foundation.
You definitely do.
Right.
And the mission for today's specific focus is aesthetics. What is beauty? What makes a piece of art, good?
It's a massive question.
It is. When we usually try to figure out the basic rules of reality, we gravitate toward the concrete. We like measurements, we like gravity, the boiling point of water, the indisputable fact that a triangle has 3 sides.
Sure, because it's comforting. It's verifiable.
Right. But the moment you try to evaluate a painting, or honestly, even just arrange the furniture in your living room so it feels right, you are stepping into incredibly murky waters.
So murky.
So today, we are going to synthesize how humans have attempted to define, perceive, and judge beauty in art. We're moving from ancient metaphysics all the way to modern neurobiology and artificial intelligence.
What's really fascinating here is that the stakes are actually incredibly high.
How so?
Well, people tend to think of aesthetics as a luxury, like it's something reserved for museum curators or fashion designers. But it is a primary epistemological lens.
Okay, break that down for me.
Every time you pick an outfit to wear, or you feel a sudden rush of emotion from a song on the radio, or even decide to buy a specific car because of its curves, you are actively applying a theory of aesthetics.
So you are an acting esthetician without even knowing it.
Exactly.
All right, so let's start with the most fundamental baseline. Before we can even begin to debate what makes a white canvas good art, we have to ask a deceptively simple question. What actually is beauty?
Right.
When I look at a sunset and say, that is beautiful, what am I describing? Is beauty a physical property radiating out of the sun, or is it entirely a hallucination happening inside my own head?
That is the core debate. And if you track the chronological history of human thought on this, the prevailing answer completely flipped over time.
Really, flipped out.
Well, to understand how radical our modern view is, we have to go back to the classical ancient perspective, which was entirely objective.
Okay, so the Greeks.
Yes, the ancient Greeks. They didn't think of beauty as an opinion at all. They believed beauty was a physical fact of the universe, just like weight, height, or, density.
Okay, let's unpack this. If they believe beauty was a physical fact, that implies it can be measured. How do you measure beauty objectively? Put it on a scale.
You measure it with math.
Math.
Specifically, proportion and symmetry. For the ancient Greeks, beauty was inextricably linked to this concept of teleological order.
Let's pause and define that for the listener, because teleological is a pretty heavy philosophical term.
Yeah, fair enough. So teleology is the idea that everything in the universe has an ultimate purpose, an end goal, or a grand design.
Okay.
So teleological order means that things are arranged perfectly to fulfill their ultimate cosmic purpose. Aristotle argued in his Poetics that for any whole made up of parts to be beautiful, it basically must present a certain mathematical order in its arrangement.
So beauty was literally the math of
It
perfection.
was. They were looking for a literal formula.
That's wild.
Look at the sculptor Polykleitos in the 5th century BCE. He created a bronze statue of a spear bearer, and he literally titled the sculpture the canon.
Like the rule book.
Exactly. He didn't just sculpt a guy he thought looked handsome. He designed it as a physical manifestation of perfect, harmonious mathematical proportions based on human anatomy.
So it was like a scientific standard.
Yes. The idea was that if an artist reproduced these exact objective mathematical ratios, the exact length of the forearm relative to the bicep, the chest relative to the waist, they would reliably scientifically achieve beauty every single time.
It's literally a recipe, like 2 parts uniformity, 1 part variety, bake for 30 minutes, and out comes a beautiful sculpture.
And that recipe concept persisted for centuries. I mean, fast forward to the 18th century, and the philosopher Francis Hutcheson actually tried to formulate this mathematically.
What did he come up with?
He wrote that beauty is found in a compound ratio of uniformity and variety.
Okay, what does that actually mean in practice?
Meaning, if you have 2 objects that are equally uniform, say, 2 perfectly round vases, the one with more variety in its decoration is more beautiful.
Oh, I see.
And if they have the same amount of variety, the one with more uniformity is more beautiful. It's an equation.
So it's all about the object itself, the vase, the statue, the math. But parallel to this mathematical obsession, there was another massive camp in ancient philosophy, right?
Yes, the idealist or spiritual view.
And they still thought beauty was objective, but they elevated it from math into something almost religious.
Right. This is where Plato enters the picture. Plato didn't entirely disagree with the math, but he argued that beauty is far more profound than just measuring a bicep.
Sure.
For Plato, beauty is a transcendent form. In Platonic philosophy, everything we see on Earth, a chair, a horse, a beautiful person, is just a flawed physical copy of a perfect cosmic blueprint that exists in a higher realm.
The ultimate form of the thing.
Precisely. So when you see a beautiful sunset or a beautiful sculpture, you aren't just appreciating the symmetry.
What are you doing then?
Your soul is actually recognizing a faint echo of the ultimate divine form of beauty.
Oh, wow.
Earthly beauty triggers a deep spiritual longing in the human soul because it reminds us of the perfect realm we came from.
That is incredibly poetic.
Eh?
But there is a massive logical blind spot in the classical obsession with parts and symmetry, which brings us to a philosopher named Plotinus.
Ah, yes, Plotinus. He lived a few centuries after Plato, and he delivered a brilliant, devastating critique of the mathematical view of beauty.
What was his argument?
He looked at the Stoics and the classical thinkers who said, beauty is the symmetrical arrangement of parts. And he asked a very simple question. If beauty requires parts to be symmetrical, how can anything simple be beautiful?
I absolutely love this thought experiment. Because if you need a left arm to balance a right arm, what happens when there are no arms?
Exactly. Plotinus pointed out that a single flash of lightning illuminating the night sky is breathtakingly beautiful.
Yes, it is.
A single pure piece of gold is beautiful. A single solitary musical note hanging in the air can bring you to tears. None of these things have parts.
So they cannot be symmetrical.
Right. Therefore, the definition of beauty as mere symmetry is entirely broken.
So how did Plotinus redefine it then? If the lightning has no math, why is it beautiful?
He argued that beauty must be a unifying spirit. It is an immaterial, divine principle that descends upon physical matter, masters it, and rallies it into a unified whole.
So it's like the light of the soul shining through the material world.
That's a great way to put it. And this idea deeply influenced later thinkers like Hegel in the 19th century.
Oh, Hegel.
Yeah, Hegel defined beauty as the direct, sensuous manifestation of freedom or spirit. For Hegel, a rock in a stream isn't truly beautiful until human consciousness, human free spirit, transforms it into art.
Okay, so synthesizing these early centuries of thought, beauty is definitely out there. It's either baked into the geometry of the universe, or it's a cosmic spirit shining down through the material world.
Right, that was the consensus.
But then epistemology undergoes an earthquake. The ground completely gives way.
The center of gravity shifts entirely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of our series, this is one of the most important epistemological leaps in human history.
Which is what, exactly?
We move from beauty as a property of the object to a property of the mind.
The subjective or hedonist view. And this brings us to the Scottish philosopher David Hume.
Yes. Hume basically dropped a philosophical bomb. He declared that beauty is no quality in things themselves. It exists merely in the mind which contemplates them.
So each mind perceives a different beauty.
Exactly.
This has to be the origin of the phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
It absolutely is.
Because Hume is saying the sunset actually possesses zero beauty. The sun is just a ball of gas. The sky is just scattering light. The beauty is nothing more than a chemical feeling of pleasure generated inside my own brain when my eyes process those light waves.
Yes. Beauty becomes a sentiment. It is entirely subjective. The philosopher George Santayana later summarized this entire shift perfectly. He defined beauty simply as pleasure objectified.
Pleasure objectified. That's a dense phrase.
It is, but it makes sense. It means we feel a warm, positive sense of pleasure inside our bodies, but our brains trick us.
Trick us how?
We mistakenly project that internal feeling onto the external object. We think the painting is beautiful, when in reality, the painting just made us feel good.
But wait, if beauty is entirely subjective, if it's just my personal pleasure, why do we argue about it?
What do you mean?
Well, if I tell you I like the taste of chocolate ice cream, and you say you prefer vanilla, we don't go to war over it. We just accept that we have different tastes.
Sure.
But if I say the film The Godfather is a masterpiece,
Yeah.
and you say it's trash, I will genuinely judge your character. I will think you lack refinement.
That's very true.
So why do we treat aesthetic opinions like objective facts if they're just subjective feelings?
This is the exact paradox that Immanuel Kant set out to solve in the late 18th century.
Good old Kant.
Right. In his critique of judgment, Kant introduced a concept he called the judgment of taste.
Okay, how did that work?
Kant agreed with Hume that aesthetic judgments are subjective. They are based on a feeling of pleasure, not a logical scientific concept. You cannot prove a painting is beautiful using an equation.
Right, the math is gone.
However, Kant noticed the exact same human behavior you just described. When we declare something beautiful, we don't just mean, I like it.
Right. When I stand in front of a majestic waterfall, my internal monologue isn't, this pleases my personal preference.
Well, is it?
It's, this is inherently beautiful, and if the guy standing next to me doesn't feel it too, his brain is broken.
Exactly. Kant called this a subjective claim to universal validity. When we experience true beauty, we speak with a universal voice. We demand that everyone else ought to agree with us.
We treat our subjective feeling as if it were a universal rule.
Yes.
But how does Kant justify that demand? Why do I have the right to expect you to agree with my subjective feeling?
Because of the specific nature of the pleasure. Kant argued that to make a pure, legitimate judgment of beauty, the pleasure you feel must be entirely disinterested.
Okay, stop right there. Disinterested. Does that mean I have to be bored by the waterfall?
No, not at all. Disinterested in Kant's vocabulary doesn't mean apathetic. It means you are enjoying the object purely for its form, without any underlying desire to own it, consume it, or use it for a practical purpose.
Okay, let me test this to see if I understand.
Go for it.
If I look at a photograph of a perfectly baked, incredibly delicious-looking chocolate cake, and I say, that is beautiful, but my mouth is watering because I'm starving and I want to eat it,
Right.
Kant would say, that is not an aesthetic judgment. That is biological hunger.
Exactly. You have a vested practical interest in the existence of the cake. You want to consume it. Therefore, your pleasure is biased by your appetite.
Interesting.
But if you look at a painting of a swirling galaxy, you have no desire to eat it, you can't buy it, you can't use it as a tool. You are just mesmerized by the arrangement of the colors and light.
So my pleasure is completely detached from survival or utility.
Yes. It is disinterested. And Kant believed that because all humans share the same cognitive architecture, when we strip away our personal selfish appetites and just engage in this free, disinterested play of the mind, we should all arrive at the same feeling of beauty.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I have to push back on Kant here.
Let's hear it.
If you look at the hedonist views of philosophers like Diogenes in ancient Greece, or even George Berkeley much later, they argued that beauty is inextricably tied to usefulness.
That's true, they did.
I think Kant's disinterested theory is incredibly elitist. It assumes art is just something you stare at in a gallery.
How so? Give me an example of where Kant fails for you.
Think about a beautifully crafted wooden chair. If I'm admiring the craftsmanship, a massive part of my aesthetic pleasure is knowing how perfectly the wood has been bent to support the human spine.
Right, the utility.
Or think of a golden shield in ancient times. Can a shield be truly beautiful if the metal is so thin it won't protect you in battle?
I see where you're going.
Can you truly find a high-performance sports car beautiful if you know the engine is permanently broken and will never run? My pleasure is entirely dependent on its function. How can we possibly separate beauty from utility?
This raises an essential complication. And to be fair to Kant, he actually saw this problem coming.
He did.
He did. He conceded a major point here by creating two categories. He distinguished between what he called free beauty and dependent beauty.
Okay, what is the difference?
Free beauty is what we've been talking about. A wildflower, a seashell, an abstract pattern on a wallpaper. These things don't have a strict purpose. You judge them purely on their visual form.
And dependent beauty.
Dependent beauty or accessory beauty happens when you judge an object based on how perfectly it fulfills its intended concept or function.
Oh, I see.
Kant actually noted that a physically flawless, robust ox might be considered a beautiful ox because it perfectly fulfills the purpose of pulling a plow.
Okay.
But if you took those exact same physical proportions and applied them to a horse, it would be an incredibly ugly horse.
This is because the concept of a horse requires speed and agility, not massive pulling power.
Exactly.
So the aesthetic judgment relies entirely on knowing what the thing is supposed to be.
Precisely. You cannot judge the beauty of a church building without understanding that its purpose is to inspire religious awe. The function dictates the form.
Which is a perfect segue, because if beauty is this slippery, if it dances between mathematical ratios, divine spiritual forms, disinterested mental play, and functional utility, how on earth we evaluate the specific objects we actively manufacture to capture it?
That is the million-dollar question.
We move from the philosophical ether of what is beauty down into the trenches of art criticism. If I'm an artist painting a canvas or a critic walking through a gallery with a notepad, what actually makes a piece of art good?
Historically, art critics and philosophers have relied on 4 main pillars or intrinsic theories to evaluate art. These are the taxonomies of judgment.
Okay, what are they?
And what's incredibly revealing here is how each theory perfectly covers the blind spots of the others. None of them work perfectly alone.
So the 4 theories we are going to explore are Mimesis, Formalism, Expressivism, and Instrumentalism. Let's take them one by one, starting with the oldest. Mimesis, that's just a Greek word for imitation. Yeah. Okay.
Essentially, yes. Tracing all the way back to Aristotle, the mimetic theory says art is good if it perfectly imitates or represents reality. The artist is a mirror held up to nature.
So under this rubric, the skill of the artist is judged entirely by their technical ability to capture a likeness.
Exactly.
So if you paint a bowl of fruit and a bird flies down to try and eat the painted grapes because they look so real, you have created a masterpiece.
Yes, and mimesis dominated Western art for centuries. Think of the Renaissance masters obsessing over perspective and anatomy. The goal was ultimate realism.
Okay, but mimesis completely shatters the moment the camera is invented.
It really does.
And it utterly fails the moment you walk into a modern art museum. I mean, mimesis cannot explain Jackson Pollock violently dripping house paint all over a canvas. It doesn't look like anything in the real world.
Right. If imitation is the only rule, Pollock is a terrible artist.
Which brings us to the second pillar, formalism.
Exactly. When art stopped trying to just copy reality, the philosophy had to adapt. Formalism, championed in the early 20th century by critics like Clive Bell, argues that art is good based on what he called significant form.
Significant form.
Formalism demands that you strip away the subject matter completely. You ignore the story. You ignore whether the painted apple looks like a real apple.
What are you looking at then?
The mechanics of the visual experience, the balance of the lines, the harmony of the colors, the tension in the composition, the texture of the brushstrokes.
So it's all about the pieces.
Yes, formalism is about how the elements interact with each other within the frame.
So this is how you explain minimalist cold art. For example, let's look at the Russian avant-garde artist Kazimir Malevich.
Oh, perfect example.
He painted a famous piece in 1918 called White on White. It is literally just an off-white square painted slightly askew on a larger white square. That's it.
And if you apply mimesis to that, it's garbage. It represents nothing.
But if you apply formalism to white on white, it becomes a fascinating study.
Yeah.
You start looking at the subtle variation in the temperature of the 2 white paints.
Yes.
You look at the geometric tension of the tilted inner square against the straight edges of the canvas. You look at the physical texture of the paint application. The goodness of the art is entirely in its form.
Exactly right.
Okay, so formalism saves abstract art, but it feels incredibly clinical. It struggles heavily with art that is messy, narrative-driven, or deeply emotional.
It does.
If I listen to a haunting blues song that makes me weep, I'm not weeping because of the structural tension of the chord progression. I'm weeping because I feel the singer's pain.
Which leads us to the third pillar, expressivism.
Right.
Expressivism is where the heart re-enters the equation. Associated most famously with the Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy, this theory argues that art is primarily a conduit for human emotion.
I love this concept.
For Tolstoy, art is good if it sincerely and effectively transmits a specific emotion from the artist directly into the audience.
It's like emotional telepathy. Tolstoy believed that if a composer felt profound, devastating grief over the death of a child, and they poured that grief into a cello concerto,
Right.
and then 200 years later, a listener puts on headphones, hears the cello, and physically feels that exact same devastating grief in their chest, the art has succeeded.
Yes. The art is a bridge between two isolated human souls. Under Expressivism, the technical skill, the mimesis, or the formalism only matters insofar as it helps deliver the emotion.
So a technically flawed painting that makes you cry is better art than a mathematically perfect painting that leaves you feeling nothing.
Exactly.
But then, of course, you have art that is highly intellectual, conceptual, or deliberately unemotional, which Expressivism completely fails to evaluate.
Which brings us to our fourth and final pillar, instrumentalism.
Instrumentalism.
It is the most pragmatic of the four. It argues that art is good if it serves a specific extra aesthetic function. It judges art as a tool.
Does it achieve a social, moral, political, or religious purpose?
Exactly.
So propaganda.
Propaganda is a prime example. But also religious icons. Think of the massive stained glass windows in medieval European cathedrals.
Right, because most people couldn't read.
Exactly. The vast majority of the peasant population was illiterate. The stained glass wasn't just there to look pretty, it was an instrumental tool used to teach biblical stories and inspire the fear of God.
That makes total sense.
Under instrumentalism, if the art successfully alters society's behavior or morals, it is successful art.
It really is like trying to judge a Swiss Army knife.
How do you mean?
When I hand you a Swiss Army knife and ask, is this a good tool?
Yeah.
How do you answer? Are we judging how shiny and balanced the metal is? That's formalism.
Okay, I see.
Are we judging how well it cuts wood to build a fire? That's instrumentalism. Are we judging how closely it resembles the original 19th century prototype? That's mimesis.
Right.
Or are we judging how much joy and nostalgia it brings the person holding it? That's expressivism.
That analogy holds up perfectly.
And I want to ask you, the listener, to actively think about this in your own life today. When you sit down on the couch tonight to watch a movie, or you open Spotify, what is your internal rubric?
That's a great exercise.
Are you judging the movie on how realistic the dialogue sounds? You are applying mimesis. Are you praising the cinematography, the lighting, and the color grading? You are a formalist.
Yep.
Are you giving the movie 5 stars on Letterboxd purely because it made you ugly cry? You are an expressivist. Or are you praising it on social media because it had a powerful, necessary political message? You are an instrumentalist.
We really do cycle through these philosophical taxonomies every single day without realizing it.
We absolutely do.
But here is where we hit the most significant roadblock of the 20th century. If we connect this to the bigger picture, all four of these intrinsic theories, mimesis, formalism, expressivism, and instrumentalism, share one massive foundational assumption.
Which is what?
They all assume that the art object is fundamentally physically special.
Special how?
They assume that art has internal properties, paint strokes, musical notes, carved marble, that we can observe and judge using those four rubrics. They assume an art object is inherently different from a non-art object.
Right. A painting of a pipe is inherently different from the actual wooden pipe you smoke.
But what happens to all our rules when an artist presents an object that has absolutely no aesthetic properties that differentiate it from a normal, everyday object you buy at a hardware store?
This brings us to the great epistemological crisis of modern art, the institutional revolt.
It begins famously with plumbing.
I love this story. Let's set the scene. The year is 1917. Marcel Duchamp, a French artist, goes to a plumbing supply store in New York.
A standard store.
He buys a standard, mass-produced white porcelain urinal. He takes it back to his studio, turns it 90 degrees onto its back, takes a black paintbrush, and signs a fake name on it. Armut, 1917.
Yep.
He titles the piece Fountain, and he submits it to a major art exhibition.
And in doing so, he completely broke epistemology. Because try applying our four pillars to a literal urinal. Does it imitate reality? No, it is reality. Does it have significant form? No, it was stamped out in a factory alongside 1,000 identical urinals.
Does it transmit sincere human emotion? Definitely no.
Is it a tool for moral improvement? No. The intrinsic theories completely short-circuit.
But Duchamp wasn't an isolated prankster. This became a defining movement. Decades later, you have Andy Warhol creating his famous Brillo boxes.
Right, in the 60s.
Warhol didn't paint a picture of a box, he hired carpenters to build wooden cubes, and then he silk-screened the exact commercial logo of Brillo soap pads onto them.
Huh.
They looked absolutely identical to the cardboard boxes of soap you could buy at the supermarket.
And perhaps the most visceral example of this crisis is the British artist Tracey Emin and her piece titled My Bed.
Oh, this one is wild. Walk us through it.
In 1998, Tracey Emin exhibited her actual, physical, unmade bed in a gallery.
Her real bed.
Her real bed. And when I say unmade, I mean it was the bed she had languished in for several days during a period of severe suicidal depression. The sheets were heavily stained. The floor around the bed was littered with empty liquor bottles, crushed cigarette butts, used tissues, and dirty underwear.
Just totally raw.
She essentially dragged her real-world trauma into a gallery space, looked at the chaotic mess, and declared it art. It was shortlisted for the prestigious Turner Prize, and years later, it sold at auction for millions of dollars.
Now, there is a detail about this story that just perfectly highlights the absurdity of the philosophical crisis.
Oh, the ex-boyfriend story.
Yes. After My Bed sold for over £2 million, the press interviewed one of Emin's former boyfriends. And the boyfriend joked that he actually had one of her old, messy beds sitting out in his garden shed.
It's so good.
And he said if the art world was interested, he'd be willing to sell it to them for 20 grand.
It's a hilarious quote, but it asks the ultimate devastating question for philosophers of art. Why is her messy bed a multi-million-dollar masterpiece, while his messy bed is just a pile of garbage rotting in a garden shed?
Right. If you looked at photographs of both beds, you couldn't tell the difference.
So how did philosophy survive this? Because it seems like Duchamp and Emin just proved that art is a meaningless word.
To solve the crisis, philosophy had to radically evolve.
It did, and it did so through the development of the institutional theory of art, spearheaded by an American philosopher named Arthur Danto and later formalized by George Dickey.
So what did Danto do?
Danto went to a gallery in 1964 and stared at Warhol's Brillo boxes. He realized something profound. A real Brillo box from the supermarket and Warhol's Brillo box in the gallery are visually indiscernible.
The naked eye cannot spot the art.
Exactly. The difference is not physical, it is entirely contextual. Danto argued that you cannot see art with your eyes alone. It requires an invisible realm of theory, historical context, and discourse to transform an everyday object into art.
And what did he call this realm?
He called this invisible atmosphere the art world.
So the art isn't the physical wooden box. The art is the idea, the historical commentary that is wrapping the box.
Yes. And George Dickey took Danto's idea and hardened it into a strict definition. Dickey stated that a work of art is an artifact upon which the status of candidate for appreciation has been conferred by someone acting on behalf of the art world.
Okay, hold on. The status of candidate for appreciation has been conferred. It sounds like a knighthood.
That is the most accurate analogy you could use. Think about how knighthood works. A monarch takes a sword, taps a normal person on the shoulder, and confers the status of sir or dame.
Right, the person doesn't change physically.
Exactly. The physical biology of the person being knighted does not change. They don't suddenly grow taller or stronger. The change is entirely an invisible social status recognized by an institution.
So Dickey is saying that an artist, a curator, or a gallery owner acts as the monarch. They tap a urinal or a messy bed with their metaphorical sword, and they confer the status of art.
Yes.
The physical properties of the object don't matter. Art is just a status symbol granted by an institution.
That is the institutional theory in a nutshell.
Okay, here's where I have to push back hard. I hate this.
Tell me why.
If this is true, it feels like it makes the concept of art entirely arbitrary and elitist. Let's run a thought experiment.
Okay.
If I am walking through the Louvre Museum in Paris and my foot hurts, so I take off my sweaty running shoe and just leave it in the middle of the floor.
Just leave it there.
Just leave it. And then a crowd of tourists gathers around it, strokes their chins, and starts interpreting the shoe as a profound statement on modern consumerism.
Right.
Is my sweaty sneaker suddenly art, just because the context is a museum?
Yeah.
Doesn't this theory just mean that wealthy, elite gatekeepers can point their magic wands at whatever garbage they want and rig the system?
It is a very common and deeply valid critique of the institutional theory. It sounds like a mafia protecting its own racket.
Exactly.
But Dickey defends the theory by adding vital, crucial nuance about established practices and historicist context. The art world isn't just a random group of snobs pointing at things in a room. It is an established, historical, ongoing conversation.
So how does that disqualify my shoe in the Louvre?
Because an object only becomes art when it is intentionally entered into that ongoing historical conversation by someone who understands the practice.
Oh, intentionality.
Right. Duchamp's urinal worked because it was a specific, targeted intellectual challenge to the rigid artistic conventions of 1917. Emin's bed worked because it was a specific, intentional commentary on confessional art, vulnerability, and the female experience in the 1990s.
So if I accidentally drop my shoe in the Louvre, I'm not engaging in the historical practice of art making.
You have no artistic intention, you're just littering. The intention to present an object to the art world public embedded in a specific historical moment is what catalyzes the transformation.
Okay, I can accept that intention matters.
Yeah.
The context creates the art. The art world institution dictates what art is.
Huh.
But that leaves us with a deeply personal problem.
Oh.
Which brings us to the epistemology of taste.
Huh.
Because even if the museum curator assures me that the Brillo box is officially art, how do I know if it's actually good art?
Right.
Should I just trust the curator? Can I trust your opinion on beauty?
This brings us to a fascinating, highly debated area of philosophy called aesthetic testimony. To understand why this is a problem, think about how we gain knowledge in everyday life. We rely on testimony constantly.
Right. It's how human society functions. If you tell me it's raining outside, I believe you. I don't need to go outside and get my shirt wet to possess the knowledge that it's raining.
Exactly.
Trust the weather report. I trust my car mechanic when he says my brakes are bad. I trust history textbooks about the Roman Empire. We absorb knowledge through the testimony of others.
We do. But aesthetics operates under entirely different, much stricter rules.
Stricter how?
If I walk up to you and say, I just saw the new painting at the gallery and it is incredibly beautiful, elegant, and emotionally devastating, you might believe that I sincerely feel that way.
Okay.
But do you now possess the knowledge that the painting is beautiful? Most philosophers in this field say absolutely not. This limitation is known as the acquaintance principle.
The acquaintance principle.
It was most famously articulated by the philosopher Richard Wollheim.
Meaning I have to be personally acquainted with the object myself.
Precisely. Wollheim argued that judgments of aesthetic value must be based on first-hand, direct experience of the object.
So aesthetic knowledge is fundamentally not transmissible from one person to another.
Right. You cannot know a painting is beautiful just because a Pulitzer Prize-winning critic told you it is.
That feels intuitively true. But why is it true? Why can I transmit the knowledge of rain, but not the knowledge of beauty?
This splits philosophers into two camps, the optimists and the pessimists. The optimists believe that you actually can gain legitimate aesthetic knowledge via someone else's word, just like the weather report, provided the testifier is a reliable expert.
But I'm guessing the pessimists strongly disagree.
They do. The pessimists argue that aesthetic testimony fails. But even among the pessimists, there is a fascinating debate about why it fails. They are split into two subcategories:
Which are?
unavailability and unusability.
Okay, let's explore this. Unavailability pessimism means what?
Unavailability pessimism argues that aesthetic testimony simply fails to provide knowledge. Period. It is an epistemological impossibility.
Because of what?
The reason comes down to a concept called non-aesthetic dependence.
Okay, explain non-aesthetic dependence like I'm 5.
Sure. Think about a marble statue of an angel. The elegance of the angel, the feeling of grace and beauty is the aesthetic property.
Right.
But that elegance doesn't exist in a vacuum. It depends entirely on the exact physical angles, the specific depth of the carved stone, the precise curve of the wing. Those physical measurements are the non-aesthetic properties.
Right, the elegance relies on the geometry.
Because the aesthetic feeling, the elegance, is so intimately, inextricably bound to the physical perception, the curve of the stone, you cannot fully comprehend the elegance without physically seeing the stone.
I see.
If I just tell you it's elegant, I haven't given you the curves, therefore the knowledge of its beauty is unavailable to you until you look at it yourself.
Okay, that makes perfect logical sense.
Yeah.
I literally cannot feel the elegance without seeing the curve. I buy that. But what about the other camp? What is unusability pessimism?
It's a slightly different angle.
Because if I trust my friend's taste in movies completely, and he tells me a movie is a masterpiece, I can still know the fact that it's a good movie without seeing it, right? Why is that pessimistic?
Unusability pessimism concedes your point. They say, sure, maybe you can gain a piece of factual knowledge through testimony. You can possess the fact that The Godfather is a masterpiece.
Okay.
But they argue there is a social and cognitive norm that says you shouldn't use that knowledge. It is useless to you.
Why is it useless? Knowledge is power.
Because possessing the fact deprives you of the actual value of art. The value of art isn't arriving at the correct conclusion. It is the personal, cognitive, and emotional journey of getting there.
Oh, wow.
Let me put it this way. What is the difference between knowing an aesthetic fact and having an aesthetic experience?
I guess one is passive and one is active.
Right. If you just believe your friend, you have acquired a true belief about the movie status. But you haven't acquired aesthetic appreciation. You haven't engaged in the active, vulnerable process of watching the lighting, listening to the score, studying the acting, and discovering for yourself how those elements give rise to tension, beauty, and heartbreak.
So the optimist says, you know the movie is good, congratulations. But the pessimist says, knowing it is good is entirely useless if you haven't experienced why it is good.
The spoiler ruins the cognitive journey.
Exactly. Art requires participation.
Which perfectly transitions us into the next stage of our journey. Because if we accept the acquaintance principle, if we accept that experiencing art is a highly individual, subjective, biological requirement, we have to ask the ultimate material question.
What's that?
What is physically and emotionally happening inside our bodies during that firsthand experience? We've been talking entirely about Western analytic philosophy, debating Kant and Dickey. Let's shift our epistemology to neuroscience and Eastern philosophy. And this is where the story gets thrilling, because the modern empirical sciences are starting to validate what the ancient philosophers were guessing at. We enter the rapidly growing realm of neuroaesthetics.
Neuroaesthetics.
Yes. Scientists are using fMRI machines to map exactly what happens in the human brain when we experience beauty.
And what do they see? I imagine the reward centers light up, right? Like eating sugar.
Yes, the brain's reward centers, the same areas that respond to food, sex, or safety, light up heavily. But beauty does something unique. It strongly engages a brain network called the default mode network, or the DMN.
I've heard of the default mode network in relation to meditation and focus.
Right.
Originally, scientists thought the DMN was only active when you were daydreaming or when your mind was wandering. Basically, it's the network that turns on when you aren't focused on a specific practical task.
Exactly. It's the brain's state of inward reflection and identity processing. When you are doing a math problem or hunting for food, the DMN shuts down.
But neuroaesthetics has found that art turns it on.
Yes, profound aesthetic experiences looking at a breathtaking painting or hearing a sweeping symphony strongly activate this network. Think about the implications of that. It means that experiencing beauty physically requires your brain to suspend outward, task-oriented focus.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because that neurobiological data perfectly mirrors what Immanuel Kant said in the 18th century.
It really does.
Remember Kant's concept of the free play of imagination and understanding and disinterested pleasure?
Yep.
Kant theorized that to experience beauty, we have to detach from practical utility. We have to stop wanting to eat the cake or use the chair. And now, hundreds of years later, scientists are putting people in brain scanners and saying, look, when they see beauty, their brain literally detaches from task-oriented utility and enters a state of reflective free play.
It's amazing.
Science is proving what philosophy guessed centuries ago.
It is a stunning, beautiful convergence of disciplines. And this neurological reality supports the view of modern thinkers like the late British philosopher Roger Scruton.
Scruton, right?
In his phenomenal documentary, Why Beauty Matters, Scruton argues from an evolutionary biology standpoint. He asserts that beauty is not a luxury. It's not just a nice evolutionary byproduct or a cultural invention.
What is it then?
It is a profound biological and spiritual human need. Scruton argues that we live in a chaotic, dangerous, and often meaningless natural world. The human brain desperately needs order, harmony, and transcendence to survive without falling into despair.
So it's survival.
Yes. Experiencing beauty, whether it's the mathematical order of a Greek temple or the emotional order of a Mozart sonata, fulfills a fundamental biological imperative to find meaning and balance in existence.
We literally need beauty to stay sane. And this need for transcendent order isn't just a Western idea. To fully understand this, we have to look outside the European tradition.
We definitely do.
The sources take us deep into Indian aesthetics, specifically Rasa theory, which predates a significant portion of Western aesthetic philosophy.
Yes. And it offers a completely different, deeply profound lens. Rasa theory is rooted in ancient Sanskrit texts, primarily the Natyasastra composed by Bharata around the first millennium BCE, and later brilliantly expanded by the 10th century philosopher Abhinavagupta.
How does it differ from the Western theories we've discussed?
Western aesthetics often obsesses over the physical object. We debate the symmetry of the marble, the context of the urinal in the gallery, the intention of the artist.
Right, the focus is external.
Rasa theory bypasses the object and focuses almost entirely on the internal, transformative emotional state of the receiver. The word rasa translates roughly to juice or aesthetic flavor or essence.
So it's about the emotional response. But it's not just everyday emotion, right? If I get mad in traffic, that isn't rasa.
Correct. Rasa is elevated. It involves a critical process called sadharanakarana, which translates to universalization. Let me explain how it works.
Please do.
If you go to a theater and watch a tragic play about a mother losing a child, and you just sit there feeling your own personal, petty sadness, maybe it reminds you of a fight you had with your own mother. You are not experiencing rasa. You are stuck in your own ego.
So how do you achieve rasa?
Rasa requires the personal ego to be temporarily stripped away. Through the power of the art, the acting, the music, the poetry, you transcend your individual identity.
Oh, I see.
You stop being you for a moment, and you experience a universalized, pure emotional relish. You don't feel your sadness, you feel the universal essence of human sorrow.
That sounds incredibly powerful.
It is. It is a state of transcendental beauty, known as Alakika rasa, where you connect with the universal human condition.
I love pointing out the overlap here. You have the neurobiological need for order and harmony that Roger Scruton talks about, relying on the default mode network in the brain to disengage from our practical ego-driven tasks. And right there alongside it, separated by thousands of years and continents, you have the ancient Indian concept of rasa, creating a unified, transcendental emotional state by deliberately stripping away the practical ego.
It's the same core truth.
Whether you are using an fMRI scanner in a modern lab or writing Sanskrit texts thousands of years ago, the conclusion is identical. Beauty is the mechanism that connects our isolated inner experience to something larger than ourselves.
It is a profound synthesis. Beauty acts as the essential bridge between the isolated individual and the external universe.
But, and this is a big but, what happens to that bridge when humans are no longer the only ones building it?
Right, the digital age.
That brings us to our final and perhaps most urgent topic today, the digital disruption. Code, artificial intelligence, and NFTs. Because if beauty is this deeply biological human need rooted in our brains and ancient traditions, we are facing an unprecedented crisis right now.
We are in the midst of a total paradigm shift. For millennia, art has been constrained by physical media, paint, stone, wood, human vocal cords.
The physical world.
Digital aesthetics completely removes those constraints, and in doing so, it challenges every intrinsic theory we've discussed.
Give me an example of how digital art breaks the old rules.
Let's look at glitch art. Glitch art intentionally breaks digital code to create visual errors, corrupted files, jagged pixelation, neon color tearing across a screen.
Okay, yeah.
Think about formalism, which judges art by its perfect lines and harmonious composition. Glitch art relies on bad form. It treats technological failure, the breakdown of the system, as an aesthetic virtue. It finds beauty in the destruction of order.
And beyond breaking formalism, the digital era completely shatters the institutional theory of art. Dickey said you need a gallery curator or an art world elite to tap the object with a sword and confer the status of art.
Right.
But the internet democratized distribution. You don't need a curator in New York or Paris to validate your work anymore. A 16-year-old on TikTok can generate a piece of digital art, reach 10 million views, and shift global aesthetic trends overnight. The art world gatekeepers have completely lost their monopoly on validation.
That democratization is incredibly empowering. But it comes with massive, terrifying philosophical complications, especially with the rapid rise of generative AI art. We are talking about using neural networks and algorithms to generate imagery from text prompts.
Midjourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion.
Exactly. This creates an immediate crisis of authorship. If an algorithm generates a visually stunning, emotionally evocative image of a crying astronaut, who is the artist?
A good question.
Is it the programmer who built the model? Is it the user who typed crying astronaut in the style of Rembrandt into the prompt box? Or is it the machine itself?
And it brings up a foundational epistemological question that challenges everything we've built today. We know how AI works. It scrapes millions of existing human plant images, analyzes the pixels, and mimics the statistical pattern.
It's essentially mimicking.
So is the AI actually creating art, or is it just acting as a highly complex computational mirror of human mimesis? Can an algorithm have an intention?
That is the million-dollar question. Because let's go back to Expressivism, Tolstoy's theory that art is the sincere transmission of human emotion from the creator to the audience.
AI doesn't have emotions.
It has absolutely zero emotion to transmit. It is silicon in code. It cannot feel grief or joy or longing or fear of death. It can only simulate the visual output of those emotions.
So we arrive at what we can call the Kantian dilemma of AI art. Kant argued that aesthetic pleasure requires the free play of human faculties.
Right.
When we look at a Rembrandt painting, a massive part of our pleasure is recognizing the human spirit, the physical effort, the years of practice, the human consciousness behind the brushstrokes.
But what happens when an AI generates a masterpiece that is visually, pixel for pixel, indistinguishable from a human painting? And if it successfully triggers the default mode network in your brain, does it satisfy our aesthetic needs?
This is the dilemma. If I look at a painting and don't know a machine made it, I might weep at its beauty. I might feel rasa. But the moment you whisper in my ear, actually a computer generated that in 3 seconds, the beauty instantly evaporates.
It just disappears.
I feel cheated. I feel hollow. Why? Because the aesthetic experience is not just about the final image hitting my retina. It is about a relational connection to another consciousness. I want to know there's a human soul on the other end of the line.
And this anxiety over losing the human connection led the digital art world to a very strange, highly controversial solution. Instead of solving the philosophical problem, they tried to solve the economic problem by doubling down on the concept of ownership through NFTs, non-fungible tokens.
Explain how NFTs fit into this aesthetic crisis.
We have to look at the 20th century philosopher Walter Benjamin. He famously wrote an essay about the aura of a work of art.
The aura.
Benjamin argued that an original painting, like the Mona Lisa, possesses an aura, a unique presence in time and space. It has a physical history. A postcard of the Mona Lisa or a photograph of it in a textbook does not have that aura. It is just a mechanical reproduction.
Right. But in the digital realm, a JPEG can be copied infinitely and perfectly. 1 million people can have the exact same file. There is no original physical object, so the aura is completely dead.
NFTs were a technological attempt to artificially resurrect Benjamin's aura of originality. By using blockchain technology, you create a unique line of code that proves ownership of a specific digital file. You manufacture artificial scarcity in a medium defined by infinite abundance.
But that's the tragedy of it. It's not an aesthetic solution at all. It's just a legal and economic contract. If I buy the NFT of a digital painting, the painting doesn't look any more beautiful. The code of the smart contract literally becomes the art. It is the ultimate cynical culmination of the institutional theory we talked about with George Dickey. The art is no longer even a physical urinal or a bed. The art is literally just a digital certificate of status.
It is status stripped of all aesthetic property. And we must also consider an even darker epistemological danger with AI generation. These AI models are trained exclusively on existing human data.
Right, they scrape the web.
Studies are already showing that they reproduce and amplify the cultural, racial, and aesthetic biases embedded in that historical data.
So if we rely on AI to generate our visual culture going forward, we risk homogenizing global aesthetic taste.
Exactly. We risk creating a massive automated feedback loop. The algorithm only feeds us what it has already learned is popular or mathematically pleasing. It mathematically averages human taste.
That's depressing.
In doing so, it slowly erases the marginalized, the avant-garde, the strange, the challenging, the truly human deviations from the norm that have always pushed art forward.
Wow. We have gone on an absolutely massive epistemological journey today.
We really have.
Let's recap how far we've come. We started in ancient Greece with Plato and Polykleitos, believing beauty was a cosmic, mathematical fact. We moved into the 18th century with Kant and Hume, realizing that beauty happens subjectively in the mind, requiring disinterested pleasure.
Quite the leap.
Then we navigated the absurdity of the 20th century art world institutions, where curators can define a messy bed or a urinal as a masterpiece just by conferring a status. We explored the deep neural pathways of the brain and the ancient Indian philosophy of rasa, proving that we biologically and spiritually need beauty to strip away our ego. And
Yes.
finally, we face the modern digital algorithms that threaten to automate the very production of human meaning.
It is a vast, complicated, and utterly essential epistemological landscape.
And I want to remind you, the listener, why we did this. Aesthetics isn't just a pretentious topic for art critics in turtlenecks sipping wine in a gallery. It is the fundamental lens through which you organize your entire reality.
It's everyday life.
Your preference for a clean desk, the
Yeah.
way you appreciate a perfectly plated meal at a restaurant, the way you arrange the apps on your phone screen, or that specific song you play on repeat when you're sad. These are not trivial things. They are your personal epistemological tools. You use aesthetics every single day to make sense of the chaos of the world.
Beauty is never an accident. It is the compass we use to orient ourselves in existence.
Which brings me to a final speculative thought I want to leave you with, based on everything we've synthesized today. As we move rapidly into an era where artificial intelligence can generate aesthetically flawless, mathematically perfect images, music, and writing, tailored precisely to light up the neurological reward centers in our brains, we are facing a very strange horizon.
We are indeed.
If beauty has historically been the essential bridge between our messy, flawed inner life and the chaotic natural world, a way for us to find meaning, what happens when our digital environment becomes artificially saturated with algorithmic perfection?
That's a haunting question.
Will we get sick of perfection? Will our brains adapt? I wonder if, in the near future, we will evolve an entirely new aesthetic craving. Will we start to actively seek out the flawed, the unpredictable, the glitchy, and even the ugly in our art, simply to prove to ourselves that there is still a human on the other side of the canvas?
We may end up needing the ugly to remind us of who we are.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the rules of reality. The next time you walk into a room or hear a song or look at a painting, take a second, step back, and ask yourself, why do I find this beautiful? We'll see you next time.